Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders, where we will bring in experts in their respective fields and bring them to you so that they can share best practices as it relates to the past, present, and the future. Today, we are welcomed by Andrea Iorio, and he is an expert in CX. He's been doing it for many, many years. Used to be at L'Oreal and also Tinder down in Brazil, and now he's a keynote speaker, thought leader in this space, primarily as it relates back to AI and CX. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're working on nowadays, who you're working with.
First of all, thanks a lot, Chris, for having me here on the show. I think who's listening can guess from my thick accent. I'm definitely not from the US, my name also, but I'm Italian. I've been living 10 years in Brazil, and now I'm based out of Miami, where I run my keynote speaking business, again, as you've mentioned. So I'm an economist by education, and I've had also my master's degree in international relations at Johns Hopkins University in DC, and eventually ended up doing nothing of that. I started working at Groupon, actually, by good old days. Still, I think up until today, the fastest ever unicorn that, 1 year and a half since its founding. So Groupon, great case study. It also kind of like declined very quickly, almost as quickly as it grew. But I've spent 3 years there managing sales teams. And then I had the opportunity to launch Tinder in Latin America. So I was their first employee in the region, and eventually Brazil became the second biggest country in terms of active users for Tinder down there. I pivoted to L'Oreal. I was their chief digital officer again in Brazil, and now I dedicate myself fully to keynote speaking, especially on topics related to digital transformation, AI, and new technologies, but especially in the intersection with leadership and human skills and the future of work. I have a number of books published, and the latest is called Meta Leadership, around the new leadership in the age of AI. And here I am, super eager to share a bit with you, Chris, on the podcast.
Absolutely, man. Awesome. Let's talk about the origination story, right? So, you mentioned you went to Johns Hopkins, studied international relations, and then didn't do anything that's related to that. What called you into ultimately, sales before the whole digital transformation part of it? I think like just that seems to be the roots of things, and then you kind of figured out your niche. But what drew you into that? I mean, I know a lot of sales and marketing people kind of stumble into it, and they all have their own interesting journeys.
No, that's definitely true. So it all started not only with sales, but it also started with Latin America. As an Italian that had never traveled to Latin America, I started working at Groupon in Italy. And after a couple of months, I bought a copy of The Economist, the magazine, and up on the cover, Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro taking off as a rocket, and that really impacted me. I also had some connection to Brazil through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a practitioner. It's been now 15 years. And so, 1 + 1 equals 2. And I said, okay, let's go down there. And eventually they were hiring for a regional sales manager in Belo Horizonte, one of the biggest Brazilian cities. And so I liked very much, of course, managing sales team, but also being a salesperson myself, because I think it's one of those universal skills that eventually we practice, first of all, every day, even if, negotiating in our day-to-day life, but also, especially in a world where basically we'll talk about that AI is going to substitute, well, now also a number of our cognitive skills. There's some traits related to sales that cannot really be substituted, and those are the most human traits when it comes to empathy and when it becomes, to also self-knowledge and all of that. And so basically, I also wanted to develop myself a little bit in that realm as an economist that maybe also at the time feared technology substituting me. I think economists now fear the same with the ChatGPT and all the tools out there. I wanted really to get into sales, and it eventually proved to be a great experience. And then I started to pivot more into marketing, because that was eventually what Tinder mostly required from me and from the teams.
Got it. On the marketing side, obviously that segues, I think, pretty organically into like the digital transformation front, because like everything then is now shifting from sales, which is, if you're involved in direct sales, it's a lot more of a proactive approach, and it's like immediate results. And then when you're talking about going to the marketing side, that's more of like strategy, high level thinking, putting things into place that's going to be realized maybe months later, and then looking at metrics and ROI from that. So talk about like that transition and what was the learning curve there? Because I feel like you probably, although the keynote speaking stems from both worlds, I'm sure that the digital transformation part of it and what you speak on intelligently around that stems from more so the marketing side.
That's correct. I mean, I think, and I agree with you on this shift on what sales means. It going also slightly more towards marketing and branding, because I feel all of the AI tools, and not only AI based, but think from omni-channel, e-commerce, digital, and so on. They are shifting sales from something transactional to something much more based. I would even say conversational, experiential, and so on. And so these tools are much more efficient, productive. They remember better about dates, names, and data of their customer than salespeople,
Yeah.
right? So they're taking over the transactional side, that side that is a little bit pushy when it's time to remember to, what about the proposal that I've sent you 7 days ago, right? They remember about this much better than us. And maybe they don't even feel that feeling that salespeople might feel, okay, I'm too pushy. So neutral approach, very transactional. And so they, though, these tools free up time for salespeople to become much more focused on strategy, focused on marketing and branding, and how to envelop their proposals on pricing and so on. So I think the shift has been happening also because of the digital transformation. And that's why I also believe that the role and scope and responsibility, even the actually skill set of a salesperson has really changed a lot and is going to change even more. Not again that, salesperson that convinces everyone through their speech, but someone that is much more strategic and knows how to use AI in order to make a much better impact, personalized experience, bring instant gratification, and so on. And so that's super important.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit, I guess, like from making that transition where, you kind of now you formulated what digital transformation means to you and what that landscape looks like and how other companies are, how you can help other companies, I think, understand the narrative around it and why it's important, and why it's especially critical to stay at the forefront of digital transformation, because I think, you're going to have your champions of certain things, and then you're going to have the middle of the group where they're going to be playing catch up a lot of the times, and then you got your people in the back, and they don't adopt anything until 90% of the market has. And so I'm sure you're leading the top 10% of those movers and shakers that are looking to adopt fairly quickly because they know that they need to. And working with them, like how do you structure the conversation, right? Like, are you going in, and when you look at some of these companies, or you're afterwards people are asking you questions, what are your thought processes, or do you have like a high level of like an audit system of checks and balances to understand like where they stand, where their needs are, and then do you see thematically kind of like certain issues that tend to rise to the top, or maybe even stuff like that's just lost in translation? Because I feel like that happens a lot of times where there's just recurring things that are just lost in general. They know, for example, they need to do this, but there's a whole bunch of confusion around that.
Chris, as an economist, I'll, use economic theory to basically approach what I believe are some of the biggest issues. Maybe I'll focus on two or three. So behavioral economics tells us that eventually any big change faces a lot of friction, and that therefore, in order to make a big change, we're talking about digital transformation, adoption of new technologies, and so on, even new processes and new behaviors in the workplace. You need to do basically two things. One, reduce that friction, and second, maximize the incentive. And so across all of these narratives, first of all, maybe giving a step back, maybe the biggest problem is that we want to have a cut and paste approach almost a standardized approach, and that digital transformation should be implementing agile and doing e-commerce and so on. And it's not necessarily true. In some ways, we first of all need to really focus on what are the real pain points, and that standardized approach might not necessarily work. You now see that in a number of industries where, for example, traditional companies are actually implementing new products and services, but that does not mean they are using the latest technologies in it, and still they're innovating. And so beyond that approach, okay, getting back to the reduction of friction and maximization of incentives, usually the narrative that I like to approach is the following. The first thing, reducing friction goes a lot through communication. So with my traditional customers, and I'll give you an example, I work with NVIDIA now. NVIDIA, biggest, of course, GPUs producer for AI in the world, and now skyrocketing with over $2 trillion market cap. We're working to educate companies and make them understand that AI is not that complex. Of course, it is complex, but its applications are less complex than any customer out there, independent, whether it's pharma, agribusiness, or the health sector, believed to be. And so explaining well the technology and actually doing small proof of concepts or small experiments helps reduce the friction that anything that is so new and transformative creates within the organizations. And the second thing is that way too often I see there's a lack of incentives in adopting these technologies. But by incentive, I don't mean that basically, the financial incentive, okay, adopt this technology and it'll get rewarded or get a bonus. But incentive can be also intangible. It can even be tied to the sense of urgency that people, and especially leaders, should have in face of a world that is changing. Way too often, these leaders are up there and they think, okay, my business is growing. My customer seems not to be complaining about most things. My employees do not complain directly with me, so things are apparently doing well, and maybe they're growing less than the market. Maybe the consumers are just, crazy about switching to a competitor. And as soon as any startup launches something that this traditional company is not doing, they just, forget about loyalty. I'm just going with the new company. And so I think leaders lack this sense of urgency. And so when it comes to the narrative, the best narrative is simplifying the understanding of technology and bringing about awareness about the external trends that are affecting the business. Way too often, leaders and companies are product centric. They look very much within, and they tend to evaluate their business performance based on internal metrics from the past. But now we have access to all of this, plethora of data, external trends, consumer behaviors, new technologies. And I like them to think, okay, if they're changing at the rate that the world is changing, because if they're not, then, there should be a bell ringing that definitely something should be done about that. So I think that's a new narrative that I think works most with very traditional businesses.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I think we had another sales expert on that was alluding to that fact, where it's like we have to be problem solvers. You have to be a problem solver, and you have to be somewhat of a problem solver and a fortune teller at the same time, right? So it's like you got to bring up to them the urgency of, if you don't make a change, what are the implications, right? And I think you basically mentioned that, where it's like if you're not growing as fast as the market is growing, you're going to be left behind.
And Chris, you're right, because we also have to be a little bit fortune tellers. Why? Because exponentiality, this rate of exponentiality is bringing so much uncertainty in business. Like, I mean, any sector, like if we, in the past we would do like 5 years plans out and trying to forecast how things would go and markets would change linearly. Well, now, much harder and very tough to. So yeah, we need to be also a little bit fortune tellers as well. I agree.
Yeah, I feel like the world, and especially in the B2B space, like the past year, 2 years, before that, we had like this great decade of like boom growth, where it was all about pulling levers and predictability and that go-to-market machine, and you put in $1, it spits out 5 kind of thing. And we are in such a very, very different place now because everything is moving so fast. And I think we're still playing catch up as to like, what does that all mean, right? And you've been obviously at some really big logos, and leading them into new markets, specifically Brazil, and with Tinder, and with, L'Oreal, and with NVIDIA. NVIDIA, let's talk about that, right? I mean, what do you, I'm sure you lead their podcast there, and a lot of the driving perhaps the awareness of this type of technology. It's difficult to argue that they're not like at the forefront, along with, OpenAI, and the whole people that are leading the AI movement, right? They're part of that. And so you're a part of that. What are you seeing, having that internal visibility, as to how it's impacted markets, and especially, I guess, like the technological adoption side of things, in the past 2 years leading into last year, this year? Because before, it was like 2+ years ago, it was like Web3 and crypto, and
Yeah.
and we're like, what's that? And now it's changed a lot, and I think there's a lot more substance with AI. Obviously, we're seeing it's very real. We all know it's going to exist now. It's going to be a part of our day-to-day conversations very quickly, if not already. But tell us a little bit about how that shift looked like for you, specifically being so ingrained into it.
Yeah, I mean, NVIDIA and other tech companies with which I do some work with around raising awareness around their technologies, are definitely all struggling with one main thing, which is, again, all of these technologies are seen with having, as having a high degree of complexity, while in their implementation, while it doesn't necessarily translate into reality. And so, what we have seen over the last couple of years is definitely more and more awareness, but still not a very high degree of adoption. Well, I would say that experiments have been undergoing, and so what you see mostly out there are pilots, especially in tech incubators or in innovation centers of very big companies that usually tend to like to separate these kind of experiments from their core business, which on the one side brings autonomy, but on the other side sometimes creates that sort of like disconnect between what the innovation labs create and then eventually the pain points of the core business, which is something we could further talk about. But so basically, what happens is that what we're missing here, maybe what we will see over the next couple of years, and that's the big objective of companies such as NVIDIA or even IBM with Watson X. We're doing some work together on raising awareness, especially on AI explainability, is basically the concept of AI at scale. So it's as much as with electricity, and Andrew Ng, former head of AI at Baidu and now founder of the AI fund, he, in a famous TED talk that I love, compared AI as being the new electricity. And that made me think that, let's imagine back in the days where Henry Ford was, doing mass production, and you would be able to, I don't know, like use electricity to speed up the, process of manufacturing cars, but you wouldn't use electricity to, for example, sell cars or input data or just, do all the manual work that was in the back office. Although you'd produce a lot of cars, you wouldn't be able to sell those cars. You wouldn't be able to get to the end customer with value added. And so that's a concept. I think that AI is not at scale yet within organizations. And let's say you might have a chatbot, a conversational AI talking to your end consumer, but I don't think, and I don't see most of the companies having the data that in real time that conversational AI produces, going back to the plant and tweaking production or changing SNOP or making real-time decisions about stock. We're seeing that, we're going to see more and more over the next years, but we still miss that vision of AI at scale. We're still in that timid phase where some areas find it easier to implement AI. I'm talking about automation, especially in back office, talking about conversational AI. I'm talking about maybe some supply chain manufacturing processes, but there's no like integration from end to end. And that's where tech companies such as NVIDIA, and again, IBM, you name it, OpenAI, of course, are trying to basically provide a solution for. And that's also what we do in the podcast. We bring about cases of companies that have managed to integrate AI initiatives within the organization, and that proves to be really kind of like really great for leaders that okay, have even that feeling. Okay, I'm trying out many new things, which happened, by the way, with digital transformation almost 10 years ago, with basic digital transformation. You had e-commerce, but e-commerce, you would have like a separate inventory for e-commerce, and then you would have like more chaos rather than optimizations. And so I think that's what we're seeing now in AI.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to allude to that too, which is I feel like we're in this like internet boom version, another uh very analogous, I suppose, but it's not a direct one for one, right? I think because of the age that we're in now, it just moves a lot faster and it's a lot more complex, but the impact on the world will be very similar, if not exponentially higher. You know, at a baseline, I think it'll change the world, the way the internet changed the world. Um, yeah. And I mean, I think what you're talking about is like those big players in the AI space, the ones at the forefront that can see the true, I think, vertical integration of AI across the company. That's what we're working towards. And maybe that is where we are still maybe I don't know how fast it can be, like maybe a few years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years away from seeing that in a few use cases in specific industries. But I don't think it's that far away where we're going to be. I could see it happening within like 2 years, where you see a company that's vertically integrated with AI and it's like run by 4 or 5 people.
And and I agree with you, Chris, because and maybe I'm saying something that the audience might say, no, 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 Andrea, you're wrong. But it's easier than we might think. And I'll
Yeah.
say why. Because I think that the big solution is related to data. And so if we set up the right data structure, we will have it much, much easier. All of this vertical or horizontal integration, because the fact now is that we have all of these data lakes scattered. They don't, they might be also biased, or maybe, I like this expression that basically, if you basically don't have the right data, you're just automating your past mistakes, right? If you have biased data or data of wrong processes or incomplete processes. But at the same time, the tasks that will be automated next are the ones where we have the most data. And so if we're able to train the models better, we will have, getting back again to economics, economies of scale, in a sense that it will be much easier, cheaper, and faster to train models and to integrate all of our algorithms, and sort of like maybe possibly over the next couple of years, hopefully.
Yeah. We had a data science expert last week. His name's Vin, and he was talking about that, which is the root infrastructure for AI to do what it can do at its most powerful scale is centered around data and collecting the right amount of data. And so, he mentioned that supply chains is a great place to start where AI can fully take over, because it has so much legacy of like data in those systems that have not been extrapolated into a way that I think is so primely fit for how AI can leverage it.
And also, supply chain is where the most of sensors and IoT tools and devices are more mature. When we think about customer and consumer facing business sort of like channels and applications, that's where we have least data, especially when we are in B2B to C
Yeah,
businesses. And no, so I totally agree with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Interesting. Um, I would love to kind of like dive into just, where when we talk about digital transformation, I think, obviously AI is the hot topic, but there's a bunch of other things involved in that space. As you mentioned, people still doing very innovative things without, making AI the forefront of that conversation. Um, what are some of the other things that you're seeing that presently are priorities for companies, especially because I think like if you pull back from like the B2B, especially like the vertical SaaS and SaaS space, we mentioned it a little bit before, but we saw this crazy growth for like 10 years, and then 2022 hit in 2023, about a year ago from now, from today, a year previous from today. And there's a universal consensus that from the SVB situation, kind of like that didn't necessarily have some direct implications, but it created like a lifting of the veil of sorts to realize what reality looks like. And all of a sudden it was like, we have way too many things for way too much excessive, more of wants than needs. And we don't really need all this stuff. And there was like a pullback from budgetary spend, pullback from decisions, all that kind of stuff. So share with me kind of what you've been seeing it going on. I just highlight some of the things we've had conversations about with some of the other guests.
That's really correct. And I mean, first of all, you're perfectly correct in saying that AI is the hot topic, the big trend out there. And I would say that the most, at least, top of mind, other topics in digital transformation are at least also directly or indirectly related to AI. One we just mentioned is data. That's where most of the IT budget is going right now. In setting up the right data structure, some companies are doing amazing work. Actually, Amazon just launched a feature that makes your company data ready for AI. And so, within the AWS structure. This is where a big chunk of the IT budget is right now, because again, directly or could be also slightly indirectly related to the growth of AI. But data is an important part. Then directly related to data is the privacy/cybersecurity side. Because of growing attacks and the growing sophistication of attacks, adversarial AI, deepfakes, and so on, I see a strong increase in budgets related to cybersecurity, safety of data, again, getting back to the same point. And this is also extremely important. What I see much less is definitely investments in Web3. Well, let's say blockchain, which was sort of like seen as the savior for the supply chain. It is being deemed now way too complex for most companies and not cheap. Where there's some good investments, well, not huge, but still some positive feedback is around VR, especially when it comes to training people and improving customer experience. I wouldn't say only VR, but also AR, but I would say between the two, VR is definitely where there's slightly more investment. But definitely the big chunk is around AI. But these are some of the interesting topics. I haven't mentioned some of also the obvious one, but that also have matured very much with the pandemic and even suffered a bit after it. E-commerce, omnichannel, mobile, and as you mentioned, SaaS. So they suffered a little bit a kickback after the pandemics because of they've been, very, very much used over there. And then with the physical, it got back to that phygital sort of word and not fully digital. And so these channels proved to suffer a small setback.
Fair enough. I know we're wrapping up on time, so I wanted to get to, there's a listener that had a question real quick. And the question is, what would be some of the major certifications to get now that you're seeing trending wise, right, for in the digital transformation space? That's the one part of the question. The second part is around data analyst jobs. Do you feel like that's going to be outsourced far greater because of AI? Or do you think that they're still going to be relevant? Or will the roles transition into something different?
Well, I'll start off with the second part of the question, which is a great question, by the way. So data scientists. So I would think they will still be very much high in demand, but the scope and the role of what a data scientist will do will change dramatically. So now we can make an analogy with a developer, we can make an analogy with a number of other professions. But the question we have to ask us is, what percentage of the work that nowadays a data scientist does, that is fully basically outsourceable to AI. And we must have, we must be honest, it's a big chunk of it. As much as of that of a developer where, you can just, Copilot or ChatGPT, they can sort of like pull out basic code, actually sophisticated code, but that has to be reviewed. And that's where I wanted to get with data scientists. It is going to pivot towards a much more strategic role that instead of just crunching data and extracting insights will become a very key figure actually within organizations and very, very important to leaders that has to pick the right KPIs. You'll become more of it's almost as with prompting with ChatGPT, right? It's not that you have to be able to definitely crank out the same information that ChatGPT. You're not competing with ChatGPT, but your ability to extract the most value out of ChatGPT is by prompting and on how you formulate the question. Data scientists, I think that the best ones and the most valuable ones to organizations will be the ones that are able to dive deep and find correlations across metrics and develop new KPIs that are able to actually make leaders make better decisions than the competition. Because you might find a correlation, a hidden correlation between exact time of the day and shopper behavior in a certain demographic, and you start implementing initiatives around that. Well, definitely, that's a very important KPI that has to be analyzed. I'll make just a funny example at Tinder. One of the KPIs we would just monitor the most was the rate of matches you have for each swipe. Because I don't care about the number of downloads or if they grew yesterday compared to the previous day, because that doesn't really tell me how well the business is going. But I know the business doing well, or at least the retention and loyalty of my customer will be great if they're having a lot of matches per swipe, because it means they're talking to a lot of people, they feel good with themselves and so on. So that's what I mean about KPI picking. I kind of like, I don't think I invented this term, but I use this term that is data sense making. It's, pivoting away from just the output, but picking what's the KPI, what's the objective you want to get to, and letting AI work for you. So I think that would change. And when it comes to certifications, well, that's a great question. To be honest, I also don't think that too many of the certifications are like really key now I mean, you should always be a lifelong learner, but I wouldn't stick to any of the particular certification either than being from Google, from like Facebook or so on when it comes to marketing, or maybe data from other certifications. But as a message, I think you should just be a lifelong learner. And now the information is out there. And whenever new technology pops out, just maybe even do it yourself. Just self-learning, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, on that note, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time and sharing a lot of these great nuggets out there and lending your area of expertise. It's super valuable.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was a pleasure being with you. And thanks everyone in the audience.
Of course, thanks.